This is the third video in the series here for the MVC Music Store, and we're going to be picking up where we left off, which is at the bottom of page 40. We had completed those steps. I had just opened up my files, and I was just trying to confirm that we had. And then as I was just about ready to get coding here, it occurred to me I'm really making a mistake. And here's my mistake. The first thing I'm going to do now that I have my project open inside of Visual Studio is I'm going to go ahead and close it. And I'm going to go locate the project in my folders. And I'm creating a version. So I'm just doing a copy paste here. Oh, I don't want to paste it inside there. I'll paste it out here. And that way, if I mess things up, I have a spot I can go back to and be reassured that everything works just fine. So that's a method of, very primitive method of versioning that you guys at the very least should employ. Okay, let's go ahead and open the project back up. I'm just going to jump in here and open it up from my recent projects. And you see all my tabs are still open, and I'm going to pull the tutorial back up on screen here. The very last directive that we have here at the bottom of page 40 is just to run the application. And just to refresh, basically, that when we run this and we go to the store page, it is going to list the number of different music categories and the 3 that we included. Just to show that the code here, where we're including the count method in there, and where it's pulling up the names dynamically with a for loop, that's all working correctly, and it is. All right, moving on to the next page here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to start creating some links between pages. Now the interesting thing here is if you're going to look at this snippet of code, we're basically going to be changing this little block of code right here, and I'm going to actually do a little formatting so it looks a little bit more similar. Is we're going to add a link basically right inside here. So notice right now that we have just basically a listing of the names, right? And this is done in a loop, right? So it finds each one of the names and outputs it. But each one of these is also going to end up having a link to the category that contains the items that fit in that category. So what we need to do is create that link, and we're going to use the for loop to kind of help us leverage that. We're going to keep this little snippet of it, but we're going to add some other stuff. And rather than trying to type around it, I'm just going to copy paste this whole thing in if I can get my cursor to cooperate. So now what's going to happen here is for every time through the loop, it's going to generate a link that's site relative. And notice the directive in here where, and you guys should be familiar with this in one of the previous examples where we typed in, equals disco, and it brought up the disco category. That's basically what we're doing here, but the name that we're bringing up is going to be dynamically inserted. So it's going to be dynamically inserted with this little snippet of Razor code here, both inside the link and the name that's displayed. So it's completely dynamic. All right, let's just go ahead, save it, and try it. And really, when we click this, it should bring up exactly the same thing. Difference now, though, is all of these are now links. And if you look at what the links do, and you can see my address bar down here as I'm hovering, is how it dynamically matches the name, which matches the category. So one little efficient line of code, we could have 100 different categories, and they would all just pop in there automatically with just very simple logic. So that's the point there. Go ahead and hit your stop button. All right, now the technique that we just used here in this file to do that work, where we were able to loop through and pull in that name and display it, is fine, right? Because really what we're doing is we're just writing some plain old HTML using a little bit of Razor code and dynamically pulling in the content. But believe it or not, the ASP.NET infrastructure has built into it what we call helper methods. Right, and you guys probably heard a little bit about helpers, but helpers are just basically little pre-built pieces of code that we pull in and we call upon as we need. And what's going to end up happening is we're going to use this approach here where we have the HTML action link, and we're going to use that in place of what we have here. In fact, what's going to end up happening is the code will end up looking like this. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And you're going to see the similarity and then the difference. In fact, I'll start by, instead of replacing, just pasting them right below. And notice the change here. Once again, we got the little, razor symbol there or whatever. And then you can see we're using a helper method called action link. Inside there, the action link is going to be generated by the same piece of information we're pulling in. And in this case, notice how it's actually, kind of instantiating on the fly here, which is kind of interesting. It's a different type of approach. The functional result is exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead and actually remove this little bit of code here. Yes, you are creating an object. You're grabbing the information and you're instantiating it in place. The name is pulled up from the thing that you're instantiating. So, in other words, that information, well, the model for it is in this file, but the way that we have proceeded so far is that the different, disco, jazz, and rock, those were hard-coded here in place. It's not typical to put it in a controller, but you can do that. That would typically be placed in a separate file of some sort and then pulled in. Now, what they want us to do is go ahead and hit the play button again. Let's see the results. Hit the store button, and then you get the same things that pop back up on the screen. And if you hover over the links, they're doing exactly the same thing. The only difference is now they've been generated by this helper method as opposed to us writing the code. Now, from a functional standpoint, really you're getting the same effect. So you can do it either way. But when you start getting more complicated things that you're working with, you're going to find that the helper methods are kind of convenient little tools that you can throw in. And you might not remember the syntax of them right away, and that's okay. You'll discover the pieces you need as you need them. Come back to Visual Studio and hit your stop button again, and let's proceed on to our next little task. Yeah, and the other thing that they're doing here, and you guys really should be in the habit of doing this too, is taking a look at the output in the browser. Do that right-click View Source to see how your code is translating into what the browser sees, because I think that's helpful. Where it becomes particularly helpful is when you're trying to style the site, and it's kind of like you want to make sure your code's coming out correctly. So that's something to keep your eyes on. All right, we're in this version of MVC that we're using, which is version 3, and it is dated. But there's a lot of applications that pre-exist out there that work on this structure. And so understanding it, I think, is helpful. If you were using MVC4 and MVC5, and I know you guys were learning in the other portions of this class, and I overheard some of you this morning talking about how the approach is a little bit different and how you work with the database, and that's absolutely true, and it changes even more when you get up to MVC6, and really it's just to tap into new technologies and new approaches. So there's, one better than the other. I guess I'll say the modern approaches typically are better, but not always. And it's also good to be exposed to this. Now, in MVC3, they have this thing called the entity framework, and that basically leverages this thing here. And maybe you guys have talked about this in lecture, and maybe you haven't. But basically, what they call object relational mapping, where you are able to take the components of the pieces that you're working with and be able to basically spell them out in code using dot syntax. You guys have kind of been doing this all along and not really kind of realizing that this is what you're doing, but that's the formal label for it, and there is an API that enables that to happen, and that's what this is indicating. Yes? Now, before we dig into any more code, the one thing I do want to throw out there, and I want to kind of reinforce this concept in your head, that some forms of application development, and you guys have probably done this in your classes with Java, PHP, when you start working with data that's external to the application, so whether it's a text file or a spreadsheet or a database, the old school way to do the development was you create the data first, or the data objects first, whether it's a text file or whatever, or you create the database, right? And you guys learned how to do database work, where you go in, you design the database, figure out your data, you set up your tables and all that stuff, and then you write the application to interface with the database. And I don't know if you guys have realized this yet, the difference with MVC is that you're actually writing your code first, and your code creates the database. I'm not sitting here, you see I'm not writing SQL statements or doing any queries. The data is basically, or the structure for the data is intrinsic to the models. That's why we build a model, where we set up, we have different genres, and all we need for the genre is a name when we do a get and a set. That happens to be a string, but it could be like 20 fields, and that's really the equivalent of a table. That's really what that is, right? This just happens to be, a repository of information that just contains one value, right? If you looked at the album, well, that's got two different values, including one of which is a different table, right? So you're pulling in basically a data type that you created from a different table. So, the mindset there is kind of what we call code first. And you may have heard that in stuff that you've read or videos that you've watched, and that approach is kind of the power of MVC as well. So just keep that in mind. So even if you're not an expert at working in the environment, at least if you understand that, you're not like, well, where's the database, right? No, database is instantiated on the fly here. That's what's going on. Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Marty. That's exactly correct. I mean, that allows the app to be, can you say that nice and loud, Marty? Right. Right. The database follows the application is really what's happening here. Now, it doesn't mean that you couldn't have a full-blown like SQL Server database or MySQL database if you want. I mean, you could do that. That's fine too. There's no harm done in that. It's just that this approach allows the coder to kind of conceptualize the data structures in the code as opposed to build the data structures and adjust the code to work with the data structure. That's the key here. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to start adding some more stuff to work with, right? So we have models for albums and genres of music, and now we're going to add some additional stuff. So record albums, of course, are produced by recording artists, so it would be kind of nice to have a model for recording artists. So what we're going to do then is we're going to add a simple model class to describe an artist, add a new class to the models folder named artist CS. So find your models folder, give it a right click, add a new class to it. We're going to call it, is it artist or artists? Tist singular. And then inside this file here, we are going to grab this code. It's a couple lines there. And go ahead and save it. They also want us to go into the album class, and they want us to add a little bit more information here. Because the truth is, there's more to what's on a record album logically. So what they want is to have us keep the two things that we have and then add some more. So I'm just going to try to make it easy on myself here and copy all of this if I can. That did not paste nicely, but we will fix it. And I'm assuming we're basically in the same order here. I'm just kind of double checking that. Not that it's too much of a thing. But notice that we're starting to do some stuff here that is more database-like. I mean, in terms of like the data that we're working with, notice that, you know, we have ID fields, because ID fields are really a good way to kind of link data together. And then, of course, things like a price, album art URL. So we're going to set up a string that's going to point to the artwork for the record. And then we have, aside from like default data types of like ints, strings, and decimals, we have data types that we created basically, which are other models, basically other tables. So we're treating those as objects. And that's logical if you think about how, you know, specifications of an album, it does match up. Save your work. Now they want us to go over to this other class file here for genre, and they want us to add some things here as well. Oh, excellent catch. I didn't even see that. Yeah, but that I think what's fascinating there is they're not changing album, but they're changing genre, and I'm trying to think of why they're doing that. But let's follow suit. Let's change it to a partial. All right. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add an AppData Directory. And if you notice here, what happens is that ASP.NET likes to store database files in that folder. The way that we built our project so far, well, at least maybe the old school way, was that the AppData folder would not pre-exist, but apparently we already have one, right? Okay. So that's probably a change in the Visual Studio version, so maybe Visual Studio 2010, which is the tool they use to do this. That one didn't automatically drop that folder in, which I find curious. I guess I don't have that recollection, but here it already pre-exists, so we don't need to go ahead and do it. Now, given the fact that it's kind of one of these pre-built constructs, it has certain like attributes that go with it. Like it expects the fact that we are going to put data inside there, so it kind of has that, forethought to it. And then we're going to move on now to the database connection portion. And I know that some of us were struggling with this piece, maybe not at this particular step, but in some of the later steps. So given the fact that we've had a few people that were able to work past this point, if we do get stuck, we are going to talk to you just to make sure what code you guys dropped in to make it all work. The thing that I'm going to really caution us on here, because I'm kind of stepping pensively into this myself, is be really careful about the details of what we're putting in. And, if you do anything that's even slightly different than what we're doing up on screen here, and it doesn't happen to work, or vice versa, if mine doesn't happen to work and yours does, let's figure out what those nuances are so that we can both figure out how to fix it and try to understand it a little bit better. Carl? That's exactly what I was going to say next. Okay, yeah, because that's a great point, because really what's happening here when we get these complicated projects, and Carl's very accurately pointing out the fact, and I'm collapsing all my little triangles here now, and you're going to see in the root of our solution, there's a web config file. And what was being pointed out yesterday by a couple students, and now Carl's noticing, is that we also have a separate web config file inside the views folder. Okay, so we got two of them to contend with. So the question is which one, and the answer to that is the global one, the one that sits in the root of the project. That's the one that we want to work with. So if you want to go ahead and just click on that and take a look inside, and you're going to see, of course, that it's nothing but an XML file, and it just holds information, configuration information for the application. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a look at this little connection string here. And they want us to drop it in just before the close of the document. Now, word of caution, all right, and maybe you guys ran into this. The one temptation you're going to have right now is you're going to see, oh, connection strings. Then you're going to look over here and you're going to see connection strings. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace that, right? Maybe not. All right, and then I'm going to query those that have gotten successfully past this point. Who's gotten successfully past this point and overwrote this code? So you guys basically intuitively and naturally left that alone? Yeah. Okay, so really what I'm hearing here is kind of a mix of techniques, right? Some people left the original one in place and added the other one. Some people tried that and it didn't work, so they commented out the old one and then it worked. And now the reason that might happen is maybe some other configuration things were not quite right at some point. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leave this one in place. That's my inclination. Even if I end up commenting it out, I don't want to have to try to figure out how to recreate it, right? Because this doesn't look like the kind of thing that's got super friendly syntax to it that I would just kind of know. So the other thing I'm going to do, since we're in here, is I'm going to go ahead and turn on my word wrap, because I like to be able to see all my code. So you can see I'm going into Tools, Options, Text Editor, All Languages, Word Wrap, just so we can see the whole darn thing. All right, I'm going to insert some space here, come back over to our file, grab the new stuff, and that's going to be placed right here. And then if you want to be kind to yourself, and really notice that this is kind of redundant in a sense, isn't it? Yeah. Right. So I'm taking out the kind of the meat in the sandwich here and putting it between the pre-existing bread and getting rid of this, because really what we're doing is we're kind of confusing the configuration file and saying connection strings, and what we just did connection strings, so that might be one thing that might trigger things to not work. Okay. So I'm also going to put a little note in here, and you can use standard HTML style comment tags. And I'm just going to say I'm not really sure at this point, frankly. That's the first one. And then I'm going to put in another comment here. All right, so leave some notes for yourself. Make some wise decisions. Don't put yourself in a spot where you can't back out of it, right? Now, we did make a backup of the whole project, so I could go there and rescue the code. But I think it's pretty safe to say that the information that's coded here, if you look at how it's coded, I mean, you should start to recognize that this is a year, month, date, timestamp, right? So it's like naming stuff based on very specific criteria. And then if you lose that criteria, you need to pull it back and it's gone. Well, you're, up the creek without a paddle. So set it up for yourself so that you can rescue yourself by putting little backup things in place as you're working. Yeah, I'm not sure why you would do that, but yeah, unlimited. There's probably some sort of a limit. Okay, I don't know what the architecture limit is, but yeah, you could put multiple connection strings in. Yeah, I mean, who's to say your application only uses one store of information, right? Um, okay, long story short, I want to make sure the application works, and I'm using somebody else's code. So I'm trying to be really careful about using it very precisely. Um, yes, if let's say you guys decided to like do this in MVC4 or MVC5, you probably just would use your own database structure, but you would make a bunch of other adjustments. I'm just trying to minimize the number of errors that we're going to encounter. I'm trying to keep everybody on the same page. So that's the reason for why I'm copying the one out of the book. All right. Next thing that we need to do is we're going to, it says right click and add a new class called Music Store Entities, and that's under the Models folder. So let's do that. And I should probably just copy that name. Easier than typing. So that's for models. Add class. Let's go ahead and give it a little zoom there. Now the other thing I'm noticing, I should probably turn my line numbers on. I'm not really quite sure how they got turned off. Yeah, that's helpful. All right, so you can see our new file. Inside this class, we got a couple of getters and setters to add. The other thing I want you to be aware of is this little piece. And for those of you that know your object-oriented programming, in C#, what does this imply? Extends. So if you compare it to Java, it would be that you're extending a different class. Now, oops, we got a little problem. I'm getting some underlines. Notice also that in the code they're sharing with us that we also have this little using directive. Okay, intelligent decision-making time. People about to go out into the field and do this for a living. The code example indicates that we're bringing in a system library. Are we adding that system library to what's already here? Or are we removing what is there? Yeah, thanks, Smarty. That's the other thing you can do. I'm about to paste that in, but right-click, and then what? Resolve. You notice what it points out? And of course, the book is telling us to use which one? The top one. All right. Which, if you look at the structure of that, system.data.entity, right, is probably the global class, and then DB context is part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just click that, and it's going to add the using statement for us. You can see now it's in place, and the red line went away. So that's another way to throw it in. But if you're getting that red line, don't freak out. There's a fix. It's just saying that you're extending this class with one that pre-exists. So this is our super class, so that must exist somewhere. It's a standard system component, and we're just pulling in the library. Save it, Control S. Okay, let's go back to the tutorial now. All right. The next little thing that we're going to look at is this concept called seeding. And I mean, it's kind of what it sounds like, but basically we're going to create files that will allow us to insert data into the application. So in other words, we're not going to run the application and add the data. We're going to inject it so it pre-exists. So that process is called seeding. And we're going to do that by pulling in some information that's already been created for us. So we don't have to sit and type it. So if we go to the Music Store Assets folder, and I'm hoping I put it in a convenient spot. Yeah, I ended up putting mine on the desktop here. It's probably not the best place for it. I'm just trying to make sure we get to the right folder here too. Code and models. And they want us to grab the sample data and then drop it into the models folder directly. So let's do that. And I'm just going to grab it, hover over the taskbar. There we go. And then pull it into the models folder directly. Yeah, you might do that. You might. That's very accurate. You might provide some seed data just as an example, or to really populate the whole thing. I mean, this is, pretty extensive file. I wouldn't want to sit here and have to type all this. Okay, but people who are going to be entry level going into this field, that's what you might have to do. Here, type up the seed file. We'll see you at lunch. Right? Right, but if you take a look at what's happening here, and just kind of step through it because it's probably good to recognize it. The one thing you're going to notice is we were doing the disco, jazz, and whatever the categories were um, in the controller. All right, and I told you that's not really kind of how we do it. This is a better way to do it. So we're gonna, it's a pretty safe guess, we're gonna pull that information out of there. We're gonna use this to populate it. So this is going to notice when we do the seed and the way that this is set up, what is it going to be passing through? The model that we created of type music store entities. And then it's going to pass in through this variable name. And then it's going to go into each area. And notice it's all array lists. All of them are doing instantiations of the data. So in other words, we're creating the data objects and, kind of pulling them out of thin air in a sense, but giving them values and then storing those values. And like I said, you don't want to sit here and type all this stuff, do you? Yeah, you could look at it that way. You could look at it that way. But you can see they did a lot of work for us here. A lot of work. Thank you very much, authors of the tutorial. But it's kind of neat to just have it available so you can see the structure of stuff, and you make sure also that the data is being pulled up correctly. All right. So right here now, we're going to have to add a little snippet of code, and notice where we're going to add this. It says double click on the global ASAX file, and that's in the root of the project also. And giving it a double click puts it into edit mode, if you're wondering. And it says in the root of the project, open it in the following, add the following line to the top, application start method. So you got to find that. So help me find it. Yeah. So right inside the application start method, right at the top, we're going to add this line of code. All right. And now we are getting an underline here, which indicates that we have a little bit of extra work to do. Any anticipations as to what we should do? Well, you guys must be better than me because I'm getting an underline. That's a great point. That's right. That's right, because I name mine with dashes, which ends up actually being underlines. So I got to come in here. So much for blazing my own trail. That's why when we're like copy pasting stuff, we want to kind of leave it alone. Is that what it is? Yeah, it is capital MVC. It's a good thing I have you guys debugging for me. Yeah, same thing happened to me. So now we have to figure that one out. So now how are we going to fix this? Yeah. Hit the little box and then what? Generate class for sample data. So you see this? Well, that's the question here, because that's accurate. We do already have a sample data class. What's the problem though? The namespace isn't right. So I'm correcting here too. So Greg, if you're having the same issue that I just had, I could do what Marty suggested, and it would have generated a class with the right namespace. But we already have it, and I know that I already messed up by putting dashes in my MVC music store, which convert to underlines, and then remembering that I just worked with a file called sample data, that's a class, right? I was able to go back and do this.
Based on corrections, like the artist is saying, would it make this thing different? Would you already have the sample data? So it's not going to have two files. I don't know.
That's a really good question. I guess I didn't click on it to see how it would mess things up. Yeah, it could potentially mess things up. So that's a spot, trouble spot there. All right, but we figured it out, right? All right. So these are the kind of things. Tread carefully. Don't be hasty. All right, save your work. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to jump over to the store controller now, and we're going to start adding some stuff here. So let's go back to the store controller. And let's pull up our example. All right, so it says here we're going to start by declaring a field on the store controller to hold an instance of the music store entities class named store DB. So in order to do that, right below the class declaration, we're going to add this line of code. It's going to come right here. No underlines, that's a wonderful thing. Remember, music store entities, this is a class we created. So it's our own data type. So we're calling it store DB. We're creating a new instance. And of course, that's going to pull in all the capabilities that go with that particular class. The next task that we have here, it says, let's update our store controller's index action to retrieve all the genres in our database. So let's drop down to the index method here, and now we're going to see that we know that this stuff is hard-coded now, right? So we don't need to do it here. So we're going to keep the view in place, but we're going to place this whole section here with this very simple little declaration, which, because of the way that we've structured things, pulls in everything that was in those other class files, which are from the music store entities, the sample data, all that. The genres are built right in. And it recognizes that because it finds all those pieces of information. It looks for the piece that we need, converts it to a list, stores it in a variable, and then we're returning it to the view. So it's going to allow us to output that information just like we were before, but now it's in the external file, it's not here. And then by very simply changing our syntax, in other situations, if we want to pull up albums or artist, really it's just a matter of replacing this word. Control S to save, folks. All right, now they want us to go ahead and run the application, so let's do that. Let's hit play. Yeah, we're initiating the application, and that's instantiating all the data. When I hit store, it should pull in all the different genres that are located in that sample data file. It creates them into links with the helper and does it all dynamically. It runs the count just like it did before. All right, so if you've been successful up until this point, that's wonderful. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop this video. So this might be a great spot to create another version of your work. So make another, close the project, copy the whole folder, and put a little indicator in there. We'll see if we can fix what few problems we have here in the classroom, and then we'll come back with a fresh video.